Looking prime to defend. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down Clemson. Please subscribe, like the videos, comment, and of course, lock it in right here for the best conversation on college football with the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry, including Pigskin Pete, talking Clemson football. You can join him right here on YouTube. Pigskin, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm amazing and fantastic. A little bit under the weather, like I just told you. But other than that, I'm amazing and fantastic as usual.
When the amazing and fantastic is able to hold even under the weather, man, that's saying a lot. Love it.
Yes.
All right, man. You know, we certainly saw the spring game, and I enjoyed the telecast because it wasn't broadcast like a typical college football game, because it's not a college football game. So some of the networks are catching up to that and really getting inside information, inside perspective from the coaching staffs, the players on the field, kind of inside what is being talked about, highlighting specific players. And so I gain a lot from watching the spring games from that perspective, getting that next wave of players and understanding, you know, their backstory and their possibility of being impact players. So as you look at not just the spring game, but the entirety of spring football there at Clemson, what are your takeaways?
Well, first of all, you're right about that. The way that was broadcast, I was actually at the spring game, so I didn't see the broadcast until I got back home. But that was a weird phenomenon, and I think it's going to catch on, like you said. And listen to the star power that was there. You had Kirk Herbstreit down there on the field, and you had Joey Galloway, and so and a bunch of other guys too. It was interesting to see that perspective of it, is sort of standing behind the offensive line in the backfield and sort of narrating the game as it went on. I thought that was pretty cool. But anyway, what I took away from it, I really didn't learn a whole lot that I didn't already know. And let's be real here. It's a glorified scrimmage. However, I was pleasantly surprised to see that Clemson took the route that some teams don't take. Now, I know some teams do, but it was a live game to them. They were hitting in full. I mean, obviously you couldn't hit the quarterback, but they were playing real football out there. So you did get a little bit of a gauge on how certain positions looked, and everybody's eyes in the country was on the defensive line. That's the narrative coming out of the mainstream media and everybody else outside of Clemson, is how are they going to recover from losing those 4 starting defensive linemen. And I wasn't surprised to see that the defensive line really set the tone of the game. And also the defensive backfield, which has been sort of the Achilles heel of this Clemson defense. If you can point out a weakness on the Clemson defense over the past 2 or 3 seasons, it's been the defensive backfield. And I was pleasantly surprised, but I wasn't really surprised to see that. I think what we're going to have in the defensive backfield this year is probably the most talent and depth that we've had in, say, the past 4 or 5 years. The real weakness is going to be at the linebacker position because of who we lost, and that was already a thin position as far as depth goes. So guys like Shaq Smith, who's a redshirt junior, he's going to have to step up. He played okay in that game. A guy named Balin Spector, who's a redshirt sophomore, who didn't get a lot of playing time, but I think he's going to have to step into a more pivotal role as far as the linebackers go. And some of these guys like Jake Venables, who, of course, is the son of defensive coordinator Brent Venables. He is, what I'm interested to see is he going to take on more of a role as well. So overall, the offense looked as good as I thought it was going to look. The 2 true freshmen that I had my eye on. Listen, I'm an offensive guy as far as my personal interest goes. I pay attention to the whole team. But when it comes to the offense, that's what I love. That's what I like to dissect and really look into. And so the 2 true freshmen that were coming in at wide receiver position, Joe Ngata, who was the number 1 wide receiver prospect out of the state of California, and then, of course, Frank Ladson out of the Miami-Dade area, 2 very highly recruited guys. And it's shocking to see. We all know that Clemson has a very talented and deep wide receiver core. But those 2 guys come on the field and look as if they've been there for 2 years already. And it's the same thing you saw last year with Justin Ross and the year before with T. Higgins. So it's overall, I think I learned not a lot personally, but I was reassured in some ways that the defensive line, the defensive backfield will be solid. and the offense is going to be as good as advertised.
Yeah, it was emphasized during the broadcast that, yeah, as you mentioned right there, that not only are these players, the two wide receivers, not only do they look the part physically, like they're grown, mature, like sophomores, juniors in college, but that their take on the offense, their ability to read coverages, their ability to get lined up properly, do all the right things with just basically a situation in which they're generally, in a sense, high school seniors, is pretty astounding that they not only have the physical ability, but they're locked into football to that degree and have a football IQ to that degree is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and that really speaks to. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. That speaks to the type of recruiting that Clemson's been doing, and of course, you want to go after the best players from the best high school teams that have the most upside. But what they do is they cherry pick not cherry pick necessarily, but they go after aggressively certain players that it's not much of a transition from their high school offense to what Clemson does. So it's not like going from the college game to the NFL game where they have to learn a whole new terminology and a scheme. It's sort of a plug and play situation. So they flourish early in their college career.
Absolutely. Pigskin Pete on the line. You can catch him on his YouTube channel. Just look up Pigskin Pete and you will get a perspective on Clemson football that you have not seen. So I encourage you to do that. This is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, bringing on the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the nation, including analysis from myself. So lock it in right here. Do all the good things that help build the channel. Like, comment, share the videos, and subscribe. And, of course, grab that Amazon link down in the description section and use that to do your Amazon shopping. Doesn't cost you a penny, but helps build the channel. All right, Pigskin, when we talk about recruiting, we'll segue right into that from an overall perspective of classes in the past that have not been right at the top of college football, but because of what you point out of there being a bent toward not just getting the most athletic or the highest rated player at that position, but getting the right fit and getting a guy who, you know, is going to love football, is going to buy into the system, do all the right things, but is still an extraordinary athlete. You've got a class here that it just seems like everything's just pointing in your direction. Like nothing can be done wrong at this point. Dabo Swinney's reputation is beyond belief. And with all the winning and just the trajectory pointed straight toward the sky, it's the #1 class in the ACC, #3 overall with 12 hard commits. And it just seems as though, again, you're going to be at the top of anyone's list who is serious about winning championships and has that type of talent.
Yeah, that is a product of winning. Listen, if you're a winning program, there's obviously the top tier talent in the country is going to be gravitated towards a program of that nature. You see it all over the country with Oklahoma, Ohio State, and you just go down the list of the top 10, 15 programs in America, and they all are at the top of everybody's recruiting list. This 2020 class, you know, we could end up anywhere between 1 and 5 when it's all said and done. We just landed Brian Breesy, who was the #1 overall recruit in the country. We are still awaiting to hear from DJ Agoublier. If I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, I think I am.
It rolled right off your tongue. It sounded good.
Yes, I've been practicing in the mirror that because I seem to butcher every last one of these tough last names. But anyway, we're still awaiting a word from him. He says he's going to announce in June, and he is the #1 rated quarterback in the 2020 class, and he is out of California. So we'll see. I personally believe he'll probably end up at Oregon, but who knows? I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up at Clemson. But Dabo Swinney, he's done a great job over the past few years at downplaying Clemson's success, you know, the Roy bus and this whole thing. And he even goes out on the limb and says that Clemson has never had a #1 recruiting class, probably never will, but that doesn't really matter because of the type of players we go after. Well, what do you do if you do have a #1 recruiting class? Because you're starting to mark all of these statements that he makes to belittle what's going on there, to try to keep them as the proverbial underdog, right? And so, I mean, how much longer can that go on before it starts looking ridiculous, right? And I think that's starting to happen now. And he may be hoping that they get the second-rated recruited class instead of the first for that very, very reason.
Well, let's face it, of course, the #1 rated recruiting class may not turn out to be on the field the #1 rated recruiting class. We know it's a really good recruiting class, and it's probably in the top 5. Yeah. But
Exactly.
Clemson bringing in number 8 one year, number 7, and number 3, they have churned out championships and championship game appearances on a regular basis. So you might as well call them number 1 recruiting classes. It's not like we brought in the 47th rated recruiting class, but we turned it into a national champion. That doesn't happen. So it's certainly a combination of all of the above. But it is funny to hear Dabo talk because, yeah, he wants to maintain the chip on the shoulder, the underdog role, despite it, when you start to pile up national championship games like they have now, looking at three of them, four playoff appearances and 3 championship games with 2 with titles. I think that ship has sailed, but hey, it works for Dabo and whatever sells the recruits, and certainly the combination of the winning and maintaining the chip on the shoulder. If he can maintain that balance, more power to him.
I feel like he's really trolling the mainstream media at this point. That's what he's
doing. He seems to be smarter than the rest of us, so I would not be surprised. All right. And so about 3 to 4 years after the recruits come in, they leave, and they've been leaving in droves, not just during the championship series, but certainly going back to 2011, 2012, when the beginning of this dynasty started with some superior talent. And we see 6 go in the NFL draft and 3 in the first round, all from the defensive front. And just kind of your thoughts about how these guys may project and fit with their particular teams.
Well, so here's the most interesting thing about this draft is not where, that the players, 3 of the 4 defensive linemen did go in the top 17. I don't think that's a shocking revelation to anybody. Although some people had some of these players a little bit lower on the list. But the biggest thing to take out of this is that where 3 of them went, or 3 of the players overall, was to Oakland. And if you look at who Oakland drafted, Clelin Ferrell, number 4 overall in the draft, most, so-called prognosticating experts had him going somewhere between 10 and 25. And he was the 4th overall player taken. And then you had, of course, Trayvon Mullen in the 2nd round taken to Oakland, and then Hunter Renfrow in the 5th round taken to Oakland. And the narrative, they also took a couple of Alabama players too, if I'm not mistaken. So what that tells me is that John Gruden and that front office in Oakland was not only looking at talent, but they were looking for a certain type of winning culture, a leadership role to come in there, because Oakland's been a mess. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to get a handle on things there. And I think that his mentality is there may be, a Josh Allen from Kentucky who is maybe a more productive and possibly a better physical player on the field to plug and play day one compared to Clelin Ferrell. You can argue that till the cows come home. But Clelin Ferrell and these other guys that I just mentioned have been a part of a leadership role on a championship, not just 1 year of a championship, but multiple years of a championship college football team. And they've been there and done that, and they don't require the grooming into the NFL that some of these other players might. Dexter Williams going number 17 overall to the Giants. Listen, a lot of Giants fans would rather have taken Dexter Lawrence maybe later than that and had Daniel Jones at 17 and Josh Allen at 6. And we can, that's a whole nother debate. And then, of course, the biggest surprise to me with all the drafts that happened, and as far as Clemson goes, was Austin Bryant falling all the way to, I believe, the 4th round, and he's taken by the Lions. I thought he was going to go early in the 2nd round. And I know he had a bad pectoral injury, which basically ripped his pectoral muscle off of its bone in November, and he continued to play all the way through the national championship, and even got the player of the game or the MVP of the game for the Notre Dame playoff game. And so I think the injury may have caused him to drop a little bit, but that's a steal in the 4th round as far as I'm concerned for Austin Bryant. So overall, I wasn't too shocked. There was a couple of players that went undrafted from Clemson that did get signed, as unrestricted free agents. Adam Choice was one, and also I believe the other was Mark Fields, who is a defensive back for Clemson. So we'll see how they work out. But it was a great draft for Clemson. And I don't think that was much of a revelation to anybody.
And back to the Oakland slice of this and grabbing so many Clemson and Alabama players, we don't get a chance to hear from NFL general managers on a regular basis, meaning their evaluation of players and to really hear their football smarts. But that's not the case with Oakland's general manager, Mike Mayock, who was an NFL network analyst forever. And I used to just sit and listen to the guy. Just basically anything out of his mouth sounded like gold, because he just had such a perspective and knowledge of the game, and the inner workings of organizations, and the inner workings of scouting and player development, that I just think that's a great fit. And I think there's definitely a connection to them believing, okay, we may take a slight compromise, very slight compromise on athleticism, to bring in the kind of players that have learned from Dabo Sweeney and Nick Saban. And I don't want to disparage the rest of the coaching staff and the roles that they played, but just the culture of we are on the field as teammates to win. And we're going to put our egos and check them to the side, but we're going to fight. We're going to be determined. We're going to be poised in clutch situations. All the things that those two coaches exemplify and their teams exemplify is playing in the clutch, being poised in critical situations, fighting, scratching, clawing, doing whatever you need to do, being smart players, being smart in situations. All those good things have to translate. And I think your best case example of that, and you've had many, has been Deshaun Watson, who was lightly regarded by a number of teams. And who knows if the Houston Texans wouldn't have stepped up, where he would have fallen in the draft, because it only takes one team to really fall in love with a player. And he's proven, hey, I can translate what I was able to do in the last 3 minutes of a national championship game to the NFL, and I'm the real deal. And a lot of that had to do with things that can't be measured.
Exactly, and you saw that with the Cleveland Farrell pick. That was the crown jewel of exactly what we're talking about. Because if you listen to the phone call that they gave him, when they told that they were going to select him at number 4, the very thing Mike Mayock said, who was the first one to talk to him in that phone call, was said, "I only need one thing from you. I need leadership. Can you do that?" And so that shows you where their mind was at with that pick. It was all about leadership. Obviously, they think he's a great player. You don't pick a defensive end number 4 overall if you don't think he's a great player, but it was more about culture and leadership. And as far as Deshaun Watson goes, it extends past him. I mean, I projected that Baker Mayfield would be a great starting quarterback in the league very early on. A lot of people thought he wouldn't because of his size and his attitude and this and that. And I don't know what people are watching. I mean, look, if you watch what he did at Oklahoma, for anybody to suggest that somehow would not translate to the NFL is mind-boggling to me. But there is that intangible factor that takes place in all these picks, especially the smarter of the scouts and the smarter of the front offices recognize things like that.
And in his case, obviously, there's a knock against Big 12 defenses, and I'm a front and center on knocking Big 12 defenses for a reason. But there are still tremendous players in the Big 12, and tremendous offensive players in particular, that have come into the league and lights out, especially at the quarterback position. But in addition to that, when he lined up against Georgia at the Rose Bowl, he almost put up 50 on them. He went to Columbus against Ohio State and a defense full of NFL players, and got the win and made them look silly at times. So he certainly did it against elite NFL college football defenses as well.
Exactly.
Pigskin Pete's on the line here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So you look him up here on YouTube. Just type in Pigskin Pete. You're going to find him talking Clemson football. So lock it in right there and keep it right here as well for college football debate, discussion, and analysis. Grab the link down in the description section for Amazon. If you do any Amazon shopping, you will help us build the channel. Doesn't cost you a penny. All right. And finally, on a down note, we had, of course, 3 players, most notably Dexter Lawrence, suspended for the playoff game due to Osterine. I am going to maybe butcher the pronunciation of that drug that was found in the systems of Dexter Lawrence, tight end Braden Galloway, and offensive lineman Zach Giella prior to the Notre Dame game. And Clemson has appealed that verdict. And that's supposed to come out here sometime in the next week or so, from what I understand. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the only reason this matters is because obviously Dexter Lawrence has moved on to the NFL. This has no effect on his future, okay? The other guy was a true freshman tight end, I believe. And so his ability to play this year is what's under question, and quite frankly, the reason I think they're doing this appeal. And that's a formality as far as I'm concerned. I don't expect that, at least I have not seen, that Clemson can produce any evidence whatsoever that says that this came from some sort of outside unknown source. Whether it did or whether it didn't is completely irrelevant when it comes to the NCAA making a ruling on this. So I think this is much to do about nothing. What you're going to see, probably, if I had to guess, is you're going to see them just strike it down and implement the suspension for the other guy involved in the thing. We may never get to the bottom of this. It's a conspiracy theory amongst non-Clemson fans that this is something that goes on, is prevalent in the Clemson organization and blah, 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 whatever. Listen, I don't believe that. If you believe that, that's great. Or not you, but people who are listening to this believe that. That's fine. I don't believe we'll ever get to the bottom of this. And if there was somebody that got to the bottom of it, I think it would be a pretty shocking and big news story. So when it comes down to it, I just don't think it really matters in the grand scheme of things.
If you love the Clemson football talk, or even if you just want to keep track of the #1 football team in America, then you check out Pigskin Pete here on YouTube. Just type in Pigskin Pete, and there you go. For the best in college football debate, discussion, and analysis on a daily basis. Keep it right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. All right, Pigskin, we appreciate you stopping by. I have some really good topics to throw your way the next time we talk, and I will tell you about those offline, but some fun discussion points during the off season.
That sounds fun. Do I get a chance to trash people on that one?
Can you trash people? You can trash. Sure. Yes. There are about 3 of those questions that will open up the field for you to attack some people. Yes.
Then I am all in, as
okay.
Dabo Swinney would say.
Absolutely. All right, Pigskin, we appreciate you stopping by.
All right, man. Thanks.